Hello and welcome to section 2.3 for Econ 2 on the AQA exam board. Today we'll be looking at the multiplier effect. The multiplier effect refers to the increase in final income arising from a new injection of spending. When there is an injection of new demand in an economy, the money will travel around the circular flow of income many times. And the multiplier value refers to how many times the initial increase in income moves around the circular flow of income and moves around the economy. Let's try and explain this by using an example. Let's suppose that the government increases their expenditure by building a bridge. Factors of production are needed to build this bridge. Workers will be employed and capital will be used. It is the households who provide the factors of production that build the bridge, and in return they receive compensation. Workers receive wages and capital receives a rate of return. This money can then be used to purchase goods and services from other firms. The firms who produce these goods that have been purchased will require factors of production to make them. These factors of production then get compensated, and the households who own these factors of production can then purchase more goods. And this continues to flow round. I'll now try and explain this through the circular flow of income diagram. So here we have the circular flow of income. We've got households, firms, banks, the government, and abroad. We will keep the example of a government increasing their expenditure by building a bridge. I've represented the increase in government expenditure by the orange arrow going from the government to firms. In order for this bridge to be produced, factors of production must be used. Factors of production must be compensated for their time and their use, which means that households receive factor payments. This is represented by the orange arrow going from firms to households. Households then use this money to consume goods from other firms, and this is represented by the orange arrow going from households to other firms. In order for other firms to produce these goods, they must employ factors of production, and these factors of production must be compensated for their time and use. This is represented by the purple arrow going from firms to households. The households who own these factors of production can then choose what to do with the income. They can choose to either consume the additional income or save the additional income. If they choose to consume the additional income, money flows from households to firms, and this is represented by the purple arrow. These goods and services that they consume must be produced by other factors of production, and then there is another factor payment that goes from firms to households, which is represented by the burgundy arrow, and this process continues and continues as money flows around the circular flow of income. But what will be the increase in final income? The size of the increase in final income depends on the marginal propensity to consume, which is MPC, and the marginal propensity to save, which is MPS. The marginal propensity to consume works out how much of additional income an individual will consume. The marginal propensity to save works out how much of an additional income an individual would save. When an individual has an increase in income, there are two choices this consumer can make. They need to decide how much of the income to consume, which is represented by the marginal propensity to consume, and how much of this income they wish to save, which is represented by the marginal propensity to save. Let's have an example. Let's suppose that my income was to increase by £1,000. Of this £1,000 increase, I choose to consume £700 and I save the remaining £300. What are the values of my marginal propensity to consume and my marginal propensity to save? Marginal propensity to consume is worked out by dividing the amount consumed by the increase in income. The amount that I consumed was 700 and my increase in income was 1,000. So I do £700 divided by £1,000, which gives me a value of 0.7. My marginal propensity to consume is 0.7. Similarly, we can work out the marginal propensity to save. We do this by doing the amount saved divided by the increase in income. The amount that I saved was £300 and my increase in income was £1,000. So we do £300 divided by £1,000, which gives us a value of 0.3. So of my increase in income, I will consume 70% of it and I will save 30% of it. The value for marginal propensity to consume plus the value for marginal propensity to save must equal 1. This is because you either consume or save your additional income. You must make one of those choices for the income. A higher value for MPC means that you consume more of your additional income. If you have a higher value for MPC, it means that you have a low value for MPS. A lower value for MPC means that you consume a small amount of your additional income. If you have a low value of MPC, it means you will have a high value of MPS. So we saw in the example before that if my marginal propensity to consume was 0.7, of the additional income, which we assumed was £1,000, I would consume £700 and save £300. Let's suppose now that my marginal propensity to consume was 0.4. This would mean that of the additional income of £1,000, I would consume £400 and save £600. So as the MPC is lower than it was before, I consume a lower amount of this additional income. Now let's go to the circular flow of income. I'm going to work through the circular flow of income with a high value of marginal propensity to consume and a low value of marginal propensity to consume. For both of these examples, they have the same increase in government expenditure. The increase in government expenditure is represented by the orange arrow going from the government to firms. The government have demanded goods and services, and in order for these goods and services to be produced, factors of production are required. These factors of production are then compensated. This is represented by the orange arrow going from firms to households. This factor payment will be the same in both situations. The first situation is when we have a high marginal propensity to consume. When we have a high value of marginal propensity to consume, it means that our households will consume a large proportion of their increase in income. This is represented by the pink arrow going from households to firms. However, the amount that these households spend on new goods and services is lower than the initial increase in government expenditure. This is because a certain amount of the additional income is saved. Firms who produce these goods and services must then pay the factors of production that are used in the production of these goods and services. And this is represented by the pink arrow going from firms to households. The pink arrow is smaller than the orange arrow because less goods and services are being demanded from households compared to the initial increase in income from government. The process then continues whereby households who own the factors of production who are used in the second round of goods and services then choose to purchase more goods and services, and so on and so on. The second situation that we'll look at is when we have a low marginal propensity to consume. This means that of the increase in income, consumers or households will only consume a small proportion of it and will instead choose to save a large proportion, or the remaining proportion. So we have the same increase in government expenditure, which is the first orange arrow. The factors of production that are used in this increase in government expenditure will then be compensated with factor payments, which is the orange arrow from firms to households. This is the same as before. Households then choose what to do with this increase in income. In this case, we have a low marginal propensity to consume, meaning that consumers will choose to only consume a small proportion of this additional income. This is represented by the purple arrow going from households to firms. We can see that the purple arrow is significantly smaller than the pink arrow, which was the arrow when we had a high marginal propensity to consume. This is because consumers are consuming a lower amount of this additional income when there is a low marginal propensity to consume. In the low marginal propensity to consume case, firms who are producing the additional goods that are being demanded by households are producing a lower amount than when we had a high marginal propensity to consume case. This means that they require fewer factors of production to produce these fewer goods. This means that the factor payments that go back to households are smaller than in the high marginal propensity to consume case. We can compare the factor payments in each of the two cases. With a low marginal propensity to consume, these factor payments are much lower than when there was a high marginal propensity to consume. This is because in the high marginal propensity to consume, firms were producing a larger amount of goods and services compared to when we had a low marginal propensity to consume. We can see this on the diagram by the much smaller purple arrow compared to the pink arrow. These factor payments go from firms to households. As firms receive these factor payments, they receive more in the high marginal propensity to consume case compared with the low marginal propensity to consume case. Households will then consume part of this additional income. In the high marginal propensity to consume case, the additional income for households is higher, and they will consume a greater proportion of this. This process will continue, and in the high marginal propensity to consume case, the final increase in income will be greater than in the low marginal propensity to consume case. But what is the final increase in income? To work out the final increase in income, we first need to work out the multiplier. We can work out the multiplier by using this formula. The formula is 1 divided by 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. It can also be worked out by doing 1 divided by the marginal propensity to save. This is because 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume is the marginal propensity to save. Suppose the marginal propensity to consume was 0.75. What is the multiplier? A value for marginal propensity to consume of 0.75 means that you will consume 75% of the additional income that you gain. We can now plug the value of marginal propensity to consume into our multiplier formula, which gives us 1 divided by 1 minus 0.75, which is 1 divided by 0.25, which gives us a value of 4. A value of 4 means that for every £1 injection into the economy, final income will increase by £4. So an injection into the economy will increase final income by 4 times the amount of the initial injection. So now let's work out the multiplier for another value of MPC. Suppose now that marginal propensity to consume is 0.5. The multiplier will be 1 divided by 1 minus 0.5, which is 1 divided by 0.5, which gives us a multiplier value of 2. This means that the final increase in income will be twice the amount of the initial injection. So for every £1 injected into the economy, final income will increase by £2. If we compare the two values of the multiplier, the first one being when marginal propensity to consume was 0.75, which gave us a multiplier value of 4, and the second one being when the marginal propensity to consume was 0.5 and the multiplier value was 2, we will see that a lower marginal propensity to consume has less of an effect on the final increase in income. But why is the multiplier effect interesting? Suppose that there was a negative output gap of £10 billion in an economy, and the government wanted to close the negative output gap but not cause a positive output gap. How much should the government spend in the economy? We can use the multiplier to find out how much the government should spend. Suppose that the multiplier is 4. The government should increase their spending by 2.5 billion. The increase in government expenditure by £2.5 billion would increase final income by £10 billion, because 2.5 billion times 4, the multiplier value, gives you a value of £10 billion. This would close the output gap. To work out how much a government should increase their expenditure to close a negative output gap, we do the negative output gap size divided by the multiplier's value. So in this example, it was 10 billion divided by 4, which gave us a value of 2.5 billion. If the government increased their expenditure by £10 billion, which is the value of the output gap, this would increase final output by 40 billion, which is too high, and this would lead to a positive output gap in the economy. Let's now consider the case of when the marginal propensity to consume is lower than it was when the multiplier was 4. The marginal propensity to consume when the multiplier was 4 was 0.75. Now let's suppose that the marginal propensity to consume is 0.5, and this gives us a value for the multiplier of 2. So in our economy, we still have the same negative output gap of £10 billion, but now the multiplier is 2. So to work out how much the government should increase their expenditure by, we do the negative output gap, which is 10 billion, divided by the multiplier, which is 2, which gives us a value of £5 billion. So the government should increase their expenditure by £5 billion, and this would close the negative output gap in the economy. The multiplier effect also needs to be considered when looking at leakages in the economy. Suppose that the government had a deficit that they wish to cut, and in order to do this, they decrease their government expenditure. This decrease in government expenditure will have a greater decrease in final income because of the multiplier effect. Suppose that the government decreased their expenditure by £5 billion, and the multiplier value was 4. This decrease of £5 billion will decrease final income by 4 times the initial increase, so it would decrease final income by £20 billion. This can have a huge effect on the economy and could even push the economy into a recession and cause a negative output gap. After the financial crisis and when the coalition government came into Parliament, they were obsessed with balancing the books and cutting government expenditure. Some economists argue that the impact of the decrease in government expenditure and the cuts to government expenditure may have been one of the factors that nearly pushed the economy into a double-dip recession in the years 2011 and 2012. So now we can look at the marginal propensity to consume in more detail. The marginal propensity to consume is not the same for all individuals. Individuals who have a lower level of income are likely to have a higher marginal propensity to consume than individuals who have a higher income level. This is because those individuals who are on higher incomes have most of the goods and services that they desire, and an increase in income for those individuals will not increase their consumption levels. However, those individuals who are on lower incomes are likely to want to consume goods and services that they do not already consume. Therefore, if a government is wishing to close a negative output gap, they should look at those individuals whose the policy is going to affect and see what their marginal propensity to consume is. One policy a government could undertake during a downturn could be to increase the income of those individuals who are on lower incomes. For example, those individuals who are on benefits or pensioners. This is because low-incomed individuals will have a high marginal propensity to consume. This means that they will consume a large proportion of the increase in income. Marginal propensity to consume is also dependent upon confidence levels of consumers. In a period of a downturn, marginal propensity to consume will be lower as consumers may be worried about the future. The US government gave out a tax rebate to its citizens after the financial crisis. This was in an attempt to stimulate the UK economy. It was called the Economic Stimulus Act of 2008. However, citizens were worried about the future and decided to save most of this rebate rather than consume it. The policy didn't really have its desired effect.